Greetings, Nadi viewers. Very happy as you have guessed it to meet Sebastian again for another great interview. And today we will discuss a lot of interesting questions and topics about instrument making, sound production, and many others. So, welcome back, Sebastian.
Uh, Thanks for inviting me, Fadel. I'm very happy to talk again, and I hope it will be interesting to the listeners.
It will be, and it's always rich culture and rich experiences that we enjoy with you whenever we meet.
Yes.
So let me start by asking what makes us admire the old masters?
Well, I'm not that old yet, so how can I hope?
Yeah. Yes.
Uh, well, it's there is this proverb that you also almost always admire the prophet from afar or from another country or from another time.
Yeah.
And that is certainly one of the aspects why we like to admire the old masters. I mean, most of the old masters would probably uh, drop dead when they saw what admiration they receive today and what prices are paid for their instruments or their paintings or whatever. And
Yeah.
and so there is this aspect of the market, of course, but
Hmm.
there is also um, the fact that really there was a golden time for many crafts where uh, peaks have been reached, which seem to be not reachable for us anymore.
Hmm.
At least that's how it seems to some. I would
Hmm.
tend to disagree with that view. But certainly there was a time, or there were actually several times when crafts and arts flourished. And
Hmm.
those were usual times when there was a very tolerant government of some sort which supported the arts and let people just do their thing. And
Hmm.
and one of these times in Europe was the Renaissance, and
Hmm.
another time was for example, in Spain under Arab rule, and and those were times when just artisans could work freely, and the economy was fairly stable, and then things
Hmm.
could just flourish. Um, There is another aspect which has to do with the aging process of instruments. Now, of course, I'm talking only about instruments, and
Hmm.
and so there is something happening when instruments age that the most important thing is that the internal mechanical damping of the wood is reduced.
Hmm. Hmm.
That makes the instrument sound a bit more open or a bit more responsive compared to the same instrument being new. And this is a process which is relevant for about 150 years.
Hmm.
Actually, after when the wood is older than 150 years, then this process seems to reverse. It's not,
Hmm.
that's like 150 is the maximum.
Hmm.
And to the best of my knowledge, scientists haven't found out why this is so, why it's reversed when it's older than 150 years, but that has been measured and observed.
Hmm.
And since when we talk about ouds, we don't have any such old ouds being played. So it's all in the relevant time span. And there is something special in the sound of old instruments. And then, of course, we think, oh, these old masters, they knew how to do it.
Mm.
But it might be simply that it's just because the instrument is so old that it has this special sound quality.
Mhm.
Uh, there is a one of my very first customers whose guitar I made in 1996.
Mhm.
Um, he's a very good player, and he has always he has a wonderful sound production. So under his
Mhm.
influence, the instrument developed at its best. And
Mhm.
and I've always been trying to sell him uh, uh, a newer guitar because I thought they were better, and
Mhm.
and I knew they were better. I had learned and improved my instruments, and
Yeah.
but whenever I showed him a new guitar, it couldn't compete with the one he played for many years because it had
Mhm.
opened up and just the sound got richer and richer. And I could only tell him, well, I know if you would play the new guitar for some years, it will be better. That, of
Mhm.
course, was not helping him, and so
Yeah.
uh, that 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 shows that you have this aging process also happening in a young instrument when it's very new,
Mhm.
especially if it's played by a good player. That's always good for the instrument. So
Mhm.
there is this aspect of the aging of the wood, and and then there is the truth that craftsmen really were very skilled, at least in some periods.
Mhm.
And we also have to remember that in the past there wasn't anything like industrial production in instrument making. So
Mhm.
all the instruments were really handmade, and and there I really do think these craftsmen, these artisans, they had skills which don't exist anymore.
Mhm.
They also had a very different mindset in the way they build instruments. Now
Yeah.
we think about measurements and accuracy, and we try to measure everything to the fine to many digits after the comma, and this wasn't what they were doing in the past at all. And they had usually a very pragmatic approach. And for example, when modern, or let's say from 20th century, scientists and instrument makers studied the old European lutes, they were
Mhm.
in the beginning they were very puzzled because
Mhm.
nothing was regular, nothing was symmetrical,
Mhm.
and they finally reconstructed the way these lute makers had been building the lutes. And it
Mhm.
showed a very different mindset because basically they started with the first string and then kind of assembled everything else around that and with
Mhm.
certain proportions in mind and so on. But it was a very different approach we usually take today.
Mhm.
And another very nice example is, which is actually there is a big problem generally in all the arts today, and I find especially in instrument making, that there is a big difference between knowledge and understanding.
Mm.
And now we have a lot of knowledge, much more than the old masters had,
Mm-hmm.
but they might have had a lot more understanding of what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And a nice example for this is that one of the big uh, um, mysteries in instrument making was always the varnish used by Stradivari and his colleagues
Mm-hmm.
in Cremona. And one instrument maker from England, David Rubio, he I don't know when he died, 10 years ago or even longer, I don't remember. He was
Mm-hmm.
a genius. He was a very good instrument maker, and he made all kinds of instruments and did a lot of research about instruments. And he also got involved into the quest for the secret of Stradivari's varnish.
Mm-hmm.
And it was thought that the most important part of this varnish was the ground.
Mm-hmm.
That is the preparation of the wooden surface for the actual varnish.
Mm.
That makes a lot of makes a lot of sense because that is actually where the way the wood vibrates is affected most.
Mm.
And so what he came up with is he had there were electromicroscopic pictures of this ground and everything, and there were a chemical analysis of the ground. And so what he did was, based on this chemical analysis, he put
Mm-hmm.
together the ingredients they had found in the ground
Mm-hmm.
on original Stradivari violins. It's available for sale now. It's called Rubio ground, or
Mm.
what is it? Something like that. In anyway,
Mm.
and um, and I think this is actually funny because what people did in the past, they actually used these types of ground. It's basically a chalk ground, which is also used in painting. It's they used it in furniture making. They used it for all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And what the craftsmen then did was they just went in the backyard of their workshop or to the nearest quarry or wherever and took a bucket full of chalk and pounded it to powder or whatever, or had it milled to powder, and then they took some animal glue and they mixed it and they smeared it on the wood and sanded it, and that was
Yeah.
their ground. Yeah, that was a very simple method. And now we have this product which is precisely analyzed chemically and reconstructed with the exact proportions of magnesium sulfate and calcium
Mm.
silicate and whatever. Yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
and and we put it on the violin or wherever and think, okay, now we're doing the same like Stradivari did. But that
Mm.
is a huge misconception in my understanding because it's not what they did. They did a
Mm-hmm.
very simple thing, and it doesn't matter at all if the chalk we use contains 15% magnesium silicate or 18%. Yeah, doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter at all. And uh, uh, I I still think, okay, this is a valid attempt to try in trying to conserve and recover lost knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not recovering the original understanding and the original working methods.
Problem solving,
Yeah.
thinking. Yeah.
And
Hmm.
and I think that the main difference uh, for the old masters compared
Mm.
to the modern masters is that they were part of a much stronger network of artisans. For example, this chalk ground, as I said, was used in practically crossover. It's in all kinds of crafts. They used the same
Yeah.
methods, and that was everybody knew how to do it, which is why it wasn't even written down anywhere, because any apprentice would know how to do it. Yeah?
Mm.
And that is something that is lost today, and I think this is a challenge or a task for our generation to try to recover and conserve as much of that both knowledge and understanding as we can, and
Mm.
uh, keepsake for future generations, because it doesn't look like we have great times ahead of us.
Interesting. Very interesting. I would like to also ask you about other examples. For example, nahat or lutes or any other instruments. What source of reflections we understand from the old masters similarly?
Well, I've taken the example of Nahat. It's I mean it was as you know a big dynasty
Mm.
over almost a century, and it's I've seen of the few Nahat ouds I've seen, they were really very different in quality. And I've seen some that were just obviously very cheaply made instruments uh, for students or I don't know what, with
Mhm.
not such exceptional sound qualities or so. But I've also seen fascinating instruments with great sound and um, well, to the one that impressed me most actually was funny because it when I saw it,
Mm.
I saw it in the workshop of Albert Mansour in Beirut, and
Mm.
he had given it a new soundboard. So
Mm.
it was an Ahad Oud, but the soundboard was from Albert Mansour, and it was a wonderful instrument. But of course, since the soundboard is the most important thing in the instrument, it didn't say that much about Nahat then. But he actually showed me the original soundboard, and from that I could imagine that it really was a very good instrument anyway, and
Mhm.
it was beyond repair, and so it had to be replaced.
Mhm.
And that actually reminds me, I don't know if I told you that story, that when I started to make ouds, I was very interested in Nahat ouds especially, and
Mhm.
and I tried to gather information about how they were built, and I couldn't really succeed in getting uh, reliable information, and especially about Nahat soundboards. And then I actually I saw one in a dream,
Mm.
which was really fascinating. And even when I was dreaming about the soundboard, I was dreaming. I was looking through. There was a white wall with a hole. It was like a museum exhibition, and I looked through the hole, and behind that there was a soundboard from Nahat. And
Mm.
I couldn't believe my luck in the dream. And I said, "Oh, I have to remember exactly what I'm seeing here." So there was a second level in the dream, as it were.
Yes.
And that was for me very interesting because this Nahat soundboard I saw in Albert Mansour's workshop, really looked like that. It was
Mm.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, uh, I'm 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 sure there are many people who know a lot more about Nahad Oud and the different members of the family and the whole history. The but from what I know, I would say it's a very good example of a tradition that could thrive in a fitting environment and in a cultural environment, and
Mm-hmm.
and that it could blossom, and then
Mm.
also declined when the environment was less favorable.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. You mentioned earlier about your first client for the
Yeah,
guitar, 1996, and you said that for a good musician, the instrument improves, not only for the aging part.
yeah.
How does that work?
It's basically from I think I don't know if there is any scientific research on that, and it would be very difficult to design and conduct studies that could actually show this effect. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it's similar to the effect of aging. And there is another phenomenon I'll come to in a minute.
Mm.
It's basically about the resins and the protein, the lignin, which is like the glue that keeps the wood together.
Mm-hmm.
This is becoming a more, how do you say in English? It's becoming more brittle, more uh, uh, losing solvents,
Mm-hmm.
and that is reducing the mechanical damping of the wood, and
Mm-hmm.
it simply means it can vibrate better, and there is
Mm-hmm.
less internal damping. I'm always saying internal mechanical damping to
Mm-hmm.
distinguish it from the radiation damping, which is occurring when sound is radiated, and that is, of course, what we want. From the
Mm-hmm.
internal mechanical damping, that we usually like to have little, or because that
Mm-hmm.
means the wood can vibrate and will not stop losing energy, will
Mm-hmm.
not stop to vibrate by losing energy in internal friction and
Mm-hmm.
in the end warmth. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, so but when there is now to this other phenomenon,
Mm-hmm.
there are some devices that have been that were developed to improve instruments, which give a strong forced vibration on the instrument, mainly the
Mm-hmm.
soundboard usually.
Yeah.
It was extensively researched by Dutch engineer by the name of Reumont, and I can give you a link to his book later. It's
Mm-hmm.
basically he developed a method of to reduce the dampening of the wood by forced vibration. It basically worked like like this, that he put in a small electro engine with uh, um, how do you call that in English? An out of center weight, a mass
Yeah.
on it to create a vibrating sinus wave, it would be. And he would start at a low frequency, lower than the lowest string, and,
Mm-hmm.
and just drive this frequency into the instrument. So the instrument will respond with the sound, and he would put a microphone in uh, um, uh, in a standardized distance. I think 1 meter he used, and measured the sound radiation, the sound intensity. He would
Mm-hmm.
always observe after some time, he would observe a sudden increase of sound radiation. And after that,
Mm-hmm.
he would go on to a higher frequency and work his way up that way. Whenever there was this increase in sound radiation, he will go up. And
Mm.
and that means that by this forced vibration, he was reducing the damping of the instrument with the aim to afterwards have an instrument which sounded more open, was more responsive, and so on. Mr. Remond himself admitted, though, that this worked well. This worked very well with big instruments like double basses or cellos. It was a
Mm-hmm.
bit critical with violins or also guitars because it can backfire that you actually produce wolf notes which were not there before. That means in
Mm-hmm.
some frequencies you overdo it and then you have a wolf note.
Mm.
Uh, um, I sometimes jokingly said, okay, this is a method to play in an instrument for people who don't like music.
Mm.
Because I think that's actually one of the most beautiful things when you have a brand new instrument uh,
Yeah.
to start playing it and to experience how the instrument opens up while you play it. Huh? That is,
Mm-hmm.
I think, a very valuable and beautiful experience. And so I never saw any need to employ
Yeah.
such techniques to work on. Could be useful, of course, if there is a problematic instrument and you think, okay, this might help. Uh, uh, in it reminds me of another actually very funny method
Mm.
which one company in Germany employed. Uh, the company doesn't exist anymore, but in the 70s and 80s, they were making guitars and ukulele for the uh, rather low price sector.
Mm-hmm.
And the their top model guitars, which were still rather low priced, they subjected to an almost unbelievable treatment because they had made a machine which
Mm.
had like two arms with boxing gloves, and these boxing gloves they would hit the instrument on the soundboard
Yeah.
and on the back, and they said it sounds better afterwards. They couldn't explain why.
Mm. Mm.
But it's
Yeah.
basically exactly the same technique, just in a very unspecific way. And
Yeah.
I think that's really funny. But uh,
Mm.
um, well, how did we get here? It's
It's about
uh,
yeah, we were talking about your first client.
right about
Yeah, yeah, and how the instrument reacts to
yeah, and
a
there
good
are many,
musician.
yes,
Yeah.
there are many. Uh, I think every instrument maker can tell you some stories about how instruments developed dependent on the player. One
Mm.
rather well-known example is from a famous guitar maker who said he made two identical guitars, and one was bought by a world-class player, and the other was bought by a rather bad amateur player. And he saw both instruments 5 years later again,
Mm.
and one was just the one who was played by the world-class player had just developed marvelously and had become
Mm.
even a lot better than it was when it was new. And the other instrument actually had closed up and had not developed, but even seems to have gotten worse.
Suffered big
And
time.
yeah, and that I can confirm that can really happen, but that's to make an instrument worse by being a bad player, that takes a lot, really. It's it but it can happen. I've seen it too.
Hmm.
And in a way, it's simply you teach the instrument how to vibrate, what sounds to produce,
Mm.
and the more variety of sound you give it, you challenge it to process, the better it will develop. That's a simple rule
Mm.
from my experience. So
Okay.
sometimes when my customers ask me, when they pick up their instruments, they ask, okay, what should I do to have it develop in the best way? And should I play scales or something? Just there is this idea you have to play every note
Mm.
evenly, and then it will develop
Mm.
good. And I always tell them the most important thing is that you enjoy the music. Second
Mhm.
important, try to produce as many sound colors as possible, and then it will
Yeah.
will develop good. That's all.
Hmm. Interesting. That technique of the center of mass, or that identical guitar experiment, this is like a fast forward aging of
Yes,
instruments,
so
or is it different?
yeah, it's sort of, but because of the way of the vibration uh,
Mm.
is uh, there is a certain risks, which is why I never was even tempted to try it on one of the
Yeah.
instruments. There is a big risk because the main when you imagine the string pulling on the bridge, on the
Mm.
it's uh, the main path of transmitting energy is a torsion movement around the length axis of the bridge.
Hmm.
And whereas this machine from Mr. Raymond is actually a kind of a brutal action of really pushing the bridge up and down,
Mm.
and or
Mm.
rather in all directions, which is very different from the real playing situation.
Mm.
And also the masses and energy involved is a lot higher. So
Hmm.
I think there really is a rather high risk to produce wolf notes, which I
Hmm.
wouldn't want to take.
Yeah. Interesting. I think it's good to move now from the old masters, and thanks for this great analysis and summary of the very important points in looking at the old masters objectively. Now
Well,
we move to the contemporary luthiers or instrument makers and musicians as well. And let me dare to say, is there a complex today that we are experiencing?
sorry, say that again, please.
Is there some complex in the way we look at things, the way we
Some
understand
complex.
things, the way we request things? What is going on now, comparing that freedom to this kind of handling things?
Well, that's a huge question, of course, and I think there is a great confusion,
Mm.
which I think has a lot to do with digitization, actually,
Mm.
and in a very broad sense,
Hmm.
because we in a way we experiencing the deconstruction, I would like to call it, of um, moral frameworks,
Mm.
which has a good side and a bad side. Huh? It's and this is being replaced by a more and more digital mindset. I would say it's
Mm.
it's we tend to see things black and white, and one and zero, and not
Mm.
not experience the subtleties anymore, the analog subtleties, and
mm,
and and that affects everything.
mm,
And so at on one side, there are more possibilities than ever. I think we have
yeah.
more, maybe more good instrument makers than in a long time, at least since the start of industrial production.
Hmm.
Knowledge has become easily available,
Hmm.
and at the same time, understanding seems to be decreasing.
Hmm.
And so, what I think is we need uh, to think about how we can build healthy
Hmm.
analog, as it were, networks, and
Hmm.
improve on teaching methods to
Hmm.
to to somehow um, keep things from falling apart.
Hmm.
And well, I don't know what to say to that. That's just such a big question that I wouldn't know where to start. Yeah? It
Yeah.
it's give me something more specific to
Yeah. For example,
move.
the situation of taking like the old standards as something put in stone, or overthinking, or overcalculating, or receiving requests from musicians. I needed this big, I needed that small. Put me this.
Mhm.
All these things are happening now at the same time because the luthier is paid to service a certain request. Plus the information, as you have said,
Yeah,
Sebastian, the too much information
yeah,
accessible, but the understanding. Now, we are living today and we continue to produce instruments. It seems from what I understand from what we talked earlier that there is a huge confusion in there. We are losing the focus. We are missing the point.
yeah. Um, this is somehow a question about the genesis and development of culture,
Mm,
basically. And
mm,
uh, well, in my field of instrument making, it's
mhm,
you find basically two opposed viewpoints.
mm,
One viewpoint is the idea that you only need to do more research, analyze everything, and then you come up
mm,
with a recipe to build the perfect instrument.
mm,
And so far, nobody seems to have achieved that. Many people have tried, but I don't. If
mm,
there actually are some of my colleagues, uh, I have one in mind. I won't name him, but he actually claims to build the best guitars based on scientific understanding,
mhm,
and but you won't find a single known player who actually plays his instrument.
mhm,
So this is a ridiculous claim, in my opinion.
mhm,
And he just defined a parameter of evaluating the instrument, and according
mhm,
to this parameter, his guitars are the best.
mhm.
And but
For sure.
obviously, this is not what the players think. Yeah? So
Yes.
the other uh, viewpoint is that, and this is actually something I argued for, that instruments are more like living species, like a being of its own who
Hmm.
who goes through an evolution. It's continuously changing, adapting,
Hmm.
and it has a past and hopefully a future. And
Hmm.
we have many examples of instruments who became extinguished.
Hmm.
And and for me, the important aspect there is if this evolution is happening in an organic way, in a natural way, or in a forced way.
Hmm.
And there are examples for uh, inventions or new methods or new constructions or whatever who have been like forced on the instruments and
Hmm.
haven't been taken up by the players because they simply didn't like the sound these instruments
Hmm.
give. There are other examples where inventions or changes have been accepted.
Hmm.
And sometimes there are many examples where changes or inventions were introduced, but
Hmm.
only accepted sometime later. And usually because the general mindset of the time has changed.
Hmm.
One example is the uh, wound bass strings have been developed already in the late 16th century, and
Hmm.
and but that they really were being used, especially on the guitar, for example, was a long time later in early 19th century actually. So it took a long time, and that had to do with other reasons because the whole um, surrounding of the guitar had changed. The music in which the guitar was used changed,
Hmm.
and then suddenly it made sense to give it more of a bass sound.
Hmm.
And also, I think it's also that the hearing preferences of people changed, and so it's always a very complex
Hmm.
process and an interaction of the environment, the instrument
Hmm.
makers, and the musicians,
Yeah.
which lead to this evolution.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, this idea of mindset is really key when we talk about how sensitive we became as musicians and as music instrument makers, and how picky we became, forgetting the purpose of the end result of this exercise, making instruments or making music.
Mm,
This pickiness is maybe a new thing. I don't know about the old days, but you might shed some light from what you have seen or
yeah.
read, or yeah.
Well, uh, first of all, this pickiness is what I live from. So
Yeah.
I'm glad it's there, but
Hmm.
it's for me it's really I'll do it because I love it.
Hmm.
I even if I nobody would pay me for it, I would still do it somehow because I'm
Hmm.
just fascinated of how you can well make wood sound like this and produce such sounds,
Yeah.
and I can totally uh, immerse myself in a single note, as it were,
Yeah.
and that gives me great pleasure. And so I do it just because I love it. That's
Yeah.
the
This is the
main
good
reason.
This is the
But
good pickiness,
yeah, but
Sebastian.
the other, I have sometimes when I see a great musician, let's say a great musician from Africa playing on a steel canister guitar,
Hmm.
self-made, making fantastic music, huh?
Mm.
Then I think, my God, what am I doing here? Uh, this is uh, uh, it's really two things. I mean, musical
Yeah, yeah.
expression and good instruments, or let's put it that way, to express yourself uh, musically, it isn't necessary to have a great instrument.
Hmm.
Now comes the big but.
Yes.
But of course, uh, uh, a good instrument can, and in my opinion, should give you more possibilities in your musical expression.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
That's efficiency and optimization.
well, let me add, this is not total. It's not entirely true for everyone, because there are some musicians who are looking for an instrument which sounds good and
Mm.
sort of does their job.
Mm.
I mean, it sounds so good that they don't need to really work on their sound production or their musical expression. They just think, okay, if I have this really good instrument, then I will sound good.
Yeah.
That,
Mm.
from my experience, always leads to frustration because it never
Mm.
really works.
Hmm.
And but there are a lot of such musicians,
Mm.
mostly amateur players,
Mm.
and they often look for instruments which have a very nice timbre, a very nice voice,
Mm.
but are rather inflexible. You can't change much in the sound.
Interesting.
But that's easy to handle because you just you pluck the string or you bow the string and it sounds nice, and okay, there we are.
Mm. Mm.
With uh, uh, an instrument I prefer is an instrument that gives you a huge potential of changing the sound, of
Mm.
making different sound colors, but that also challenges the player, because if there is a lot of possibilities, you have to control them, because
Hmm.
the instrument will simply amplify whatever you do. And if you have a bad sound production, then the instrument will show that. Huh? And
Interesting.
but that's a very, very different approach. And
Mm.
but if you have if there is a musician who is interested in really expressing him or herself and working on the sound production, then
Mm.
an instrument which can do that is
Hmm.
it's like a revelation or a redemption. It's giving freedom to
Hmm.
express, and that is what I like to build. So
Hmm.
but it also requires effort from the musician side,
Yeah.
and so I've experienced in making instruments for 30 years. I've seen everything,
Hmm.
and I've seen uh, uh, musicians who receive a new instrument, and for them it's really a redemption. They feel like, oh, finally I can do this, what I always tried, and it wasn't
Mm.
showing. And
Yeah.
there are others who see the possibilities and also see, oh, this is opening up a new space which I have to learn how to walk in. Huh? And it's a
Hmm.
challenge, but it's a positive challenge.
Yeah.
And those who are not willing to take the challenge, they usually don't come to me in the first place. They will choose another maker or another instrument,
Mhm.
and that's as it should be. Huh? It's
Yeah.
um,
Interesting. Yeah, Sebastian, I think the next question it will be about the keynote and the conference, the recent paper. But
Ah,
before
yeah.
that, let's have a break with our viewers. What would you like to share with us?
Well, when we get to this paper, uh, um, that is a very abstract and complex topic,
Hmm.
and I think it would be nice to go back to the other end, to the really beginning, which is really
Mm,
trees growing in the forest and becoming instruments. And
mm,
so maybe you would like to show this little video I had
hmm.
made and about that.
Will do.
Yeah.
So thanks, Sebastian. Now let's talk about the keynote, the paper that you participated with in the recent conference.
Um, well, that was the conference was about instrument making between tradition and innovation,
Mm-hmm.
and that was actually a wonderful conference. held in Markneukirchen, which is still is an important center of instrument making in Germany, and actually
Mhm.
at some point was the largest production site of musical instruments in the whole world.
Mhm.
It was before industrial production really started.
Mhm.
There were in Europe, there was Markneukirchen, and in France, Mirecourt.
Mhm.
In Mirecourt, it was mainly violins and stringed boat instruments. But in Markneukirchen, they really made everything.
Mhm.
Western instruments, of course. And so,
Mhm.
so there is the only place where you can actually study instrument
Mhm.
making, like bachelor, master, and so on.
Mhm.
And that's where this conference was held.
Mhm.
And I was honored to be invited to give a keynote lecture there, and
Mhm.
and and which was really very well received, I must say. And I also greatly enjoyed the preparation for that lecture because it made me really look into, okay, what's going on, where
Mhm.
are we, what's happening, and uh, yeah, and the result was that I was partly shocked to really see what's going on,
Mhm.
and that there are many areas of instrument making which are really threatened by extinction. And in the where I move, you don't feel it yet. I mean, with guitars and ouds, it's fine. It's with the oud, I always feel like, okay, it's best days might yet be to come. It's spreading all over the
Mhm.
world. It's a really universal instrument that is used in many different music cultures and types of music, and
Mhm.
there might be more good oud makers than ever, and well, that I don't know, but they things are moving forward, that I'm sure. And with the classical guitar, which of course is my other field of
Mhm.
expertise, it's
Mhm.
uh, um, that's a good example where I would say it's more knowledge than ever,
Mhm.
but maybe not more understanding. I
Mhm.
very much doubt. And
Mhm.
and there are very good young makers which do incredible things visually or in their craft skills, but as an instrument, that's another story. It's can be look
Mhm.
nice, but that doesn't mean it's a great instrument.
Mhm.
And what really shocked me was to learn that in Scandinavia, for example, they have
Mhm.
some beautiful traditional instruments like the nickel harper or a lot of wind instruments. Can't remember the names, but
Mhm.
and and one example I learned in a lecture at this conference. There was an maker of these traditional wind instruments, and he died,
Mhm.
and he was the last. And then
Mhm.
a museum came and they filmed his workshop in the state it was. They filmed every detail, everything lying around, and and just to conserve this. And they are now trying to they employed someone who tries to make sense of what they filmed and what they found. Yeah,
Mhm.
like they find some special tools, and then they wonder, okay, what might this have been used for? Why was it important, and what did he do with that? Huh?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is really, really sad that it has come to such a point that a museum has to take such really desperate measures trying to conserve this. And they admitted that, okay, they said it was our fault. We should have gone there earlier and interviewed him, or at least, or tried to find an apprentice whom he could teach to conserve the knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an extreme example, but there were several examples like this. And also that in many remote areas, in many places of the world, people can't find something like a violin maker to repair their violin.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the US or in Europe even. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
And in Germany, that is not a problem yet, of course. But I'm sure in many places in the world, that is what's happening. And
Mm-hmm.
even there are countries where you still find, let's say, oud makers, but to find someone who's really competent in repair or restoration might be impossible. So I think there is a huge need for teaching really and uh, conserving the knowledge that is still there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's about the conference, and thanks for
Right.
taking us into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
What
Um,
about the keynote and what you have participated with in there?
well, in this lecture, I covered quite a number of topics really, but basically
Mm.
my basic approach was to see if by analyzing the development and, as I said earlier, the evolution of instruments, by
Mm-hmm.
analyzing how this happens and what factors are involved,
Mm-hmm.
we might make predictions about the future.
Mm.
Although I point out that we really can't. We don't know what will happen in the future. Nobody can know that. But we can make educated guesses.
Mm-hmm.
And but uh, that I base on two uh, assumptions. That one is that everything in an instrument has a purpose. It doesn't develop randomly. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's it has a purpose, and it's in that sense I call it an organic evolution of the instrument.
Yeah.
When the desired purpose is changing, then the instrument will also change, obviously. And
Mm-hmm.
there, uh, I also came up with a comparison in from the animal world, that there are uh, innovations which are useful, like a dolphin developing, um, how do you call it? The tail, the a fluke,
Mm-hmm.
the fluke it's called,
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
develop a fluke which is more efficient in creating a forward movement.
Yeah.
And that would be an innovation which basically is harmonious and organic in the um, environment of the dolphin, of the purpose of what he is doing, and it
Mm-hmm.
makes a lot of sense. Huh? And
Mm-hmm.
and uh, uh, the extreme other example is if the same dolphin would suddenly grow wool like a sheep.
Mm,
That would not, even though wool in itself is a very nice thing, but in this context,
mm,
it doesn't make any sense, and it
mhm,
would not be an organic development. And
mhm,
you actually find such both types of developments in instrument making. Somebody comes up with a new idea and implements it into the instrument, but this idea is totally unrelated to the previous development of the instrument. And it's actually a breach of this continuous harmonic development. And
mhm,
that, in my opinion, will usually not lead to something good
mm,
because it just uh, it falls apart. It's like the wool on the dolphin. Doesn't make any sense.
mhm. Yeah.
And uh, so that's the other axiom I use, that there is such an organic evolution, because there are
Mhm,
people who don't believe that it is. And then I give a lot of examples about factors
mm,
influencing the instruments, and try to find a systematic what kind of factors are there, and
mm,
how they influence uh, uh,
mhm.
the development of an instrument. And and then I'll take this to making some guesses about future development.
Yeah.
And but I also think it would be very good to really put some research effort into that. And because
Mhm,
basically there hasn't been done real research about development of instruments. There is, of course, the field of organology, but it's
mm,
called, but it's simply taking stock. Okay, this was there, and then they did this, and then they did that, but it's not put into context.
yeah.
And so that is really uh, an empty map.
Mm,
It's a how do you call it?
mhm,
It's terra incognita. It's not
mm,
researched yet.
mhm.
And
Interesting.
yeah,
Sebastian, thank you very much actually for sharing the paper with me. I have gone through it and enjoyed reading it and
yeah.
pondering around the experience shared there. And you came across one point in the paper, which is about the future, sorry, what's going on today with the experience or the existing technology, emerging technology, AI, the way we manufacture instruments, either handmade or through fabrication. Maybe shed some light about this thing that's happening today.
Well, it's I'm not worried at all about the influence instrument AI and digitization has on instrument making directly,
Hmm.
because this is simply a new tool, and,
Hmm.
and instrument making has many times adapted, included new tools, and it sometimes might be very useful. And now I think many of my young colleagues, I myself, I have a CNC machine I
Mm.
use for some works, and it's amazing what you can do with such a machine.
Hmm.
But what I'm very much worried about is the effect uh, the digitization has on our minds, and on human culture,
Hmm.
societies, the way we interact.
Hmm.
And that is a process which started quite some time ago, much earlier than
Hmm.
most people think. It's in I think it was 1964, 65 or so that Joseph Weizenbaum wrote a software he called Eliza after
Hmm.
Eliza Doolittle from the My Fair Lady,
Hmm.
and it was a software which could talk to a human and in a therapeutical way. So it was pretending to be a shrink, a psychiatrist, and
Hmm.
answering questions you gave to it. And this software passed the so-called Turing test. So that's the test named after Alan
Hmm.
Turing.
Yeah.
If you if a computer could pretend to be a human, it
Hmm.
could fool
Yes.
you that you thought it's a human being.
Hmm.
And this software passed this test already in the 60s.
Hmm.
So that is a long time ago. Huh?
Yeah.
And since then, it's been developing continuously. And actually, even then, it was going through the newspapers, and this would revolutionize medical treatments and whatnot. And soon, psychiatrists or psychotherapists would not be needed anymore. And
Hmm.
so people were very excited about it, even though Joseph Weizenbaum himself very much warned against this then and
Hmm.
this development. And in uh, uh, but now we have reached a totally different level, and
Hmm.
the big difference is big data
Hmm.
and the huge centralized servers which collect these data,
Hmm.
in which are in the hands of very few private persons.
Hmm.
And that is a extremely dangerous development, in my opinion, which can't be underestimated, and very few people actually perceive it, or the majority of people seem to be totally ignorant about it.
Hmm.
And this is of already affecting music to a great deal. I,
Hmm.
it's, I also think it's already also quite some time, at least 20 years or so. I don't remember the name, but there was a guy, I believe in Oregon, Portland probably, who programmed a computer to compose music in the style of Bach.
Hmm.
And he managed so well that many people were actually fooled when they were had to choose what was the original Bach and what was written by the computer, composed by the computer. And
Hmm.
of course, Bach's music might be very suitable for mathematical analysis,
Hmm.
and but still, that is also not that young. Actually, it's a continuous process that such things are developed.
Hmm.
But now, in the last 5 years or so, it has reached a totally different level. I mean,
Hmm.
there is this software which actually can copy a voice. You know,
Hmm.
I could sing something in my computer and then tell the software, okay, make it sound like Elvis Presley,
Hmm.
and 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 you will hear it, and you will probably not be able to distinguish it from the real Elvis Presley.
Hmm.
And And that has an enormous effect on the economy of music, because that
Yeah.
means that for pop music, commercial music will probably very soon be simply written by AI.
Yes.
And since such music makes up, I don't know, probably 95% or so of all music played on the planet,
Mm.
that means that practically a huge number of musicians will not be needed anymore.
Hmm.
And and that is a catastrophe, because when so many musicians disappear, then all the infrastructure of training musicians will also disappear, and and uh, then really nothing is left. And now
Hmm.
the AI is trained on data from real musicians,
Hmm.
but in the future it will also be trained by music which is already written by AI.
Yeah.
So that means that the development will converge onto something which becomes more and more shallow and is not inspired by anything alive. And
Mm.
and as I see it, the best AI in the world is still a machine, is still
Mm.
incapable of a true creative invention. And I think if we go look back in the development of human culture, it in many cases it, it was a single individual who came up with something new, something original.
Mm.
And that became a spark. It was the spark which lit a new fire, as it were. And and that is a process which went on for 10,000s of years.
Mhm.
And that all that is at stake now. I mean, that
Mm.
sounds maybe a bit dramatic, but that's really how
Mhm.
I see it. This is really at stake.
Mm.
And I'm I'm the people who speak in favor or are enthusiastic about AI, they say, okay, but this will be a new way of creating things.
Mm.
And I'm I very much doubt that, because
Mm.
after all, we are humans, and whatever this new way of creation will be,
Mhm.
why should it be anything that humans find interesting, nourishing, or even nice? Huh? And it also uh, it changes us. The more, I mean, it is nothing new. It's to to develop a taste for culture. You need to be exposed to culture, and and it reminds me of something of the most important things my father told me once. It was actually I had become a father myself, and I was I wanted to take my son to a concert.
Mhm.
My son was maybe 5 years old or so at that time, my oldest son. And I was saying, discussing with my father, and said, well, I don't know if I should take him. He's still so small. He can't make any sense of that. Huh? And my father said, well, where would we get if we expose our children only to things they can make sense of? And I found that's so important, huh? Because it's
Yeah.
obviously totally true. Yeah? You have to be
Mm.
exposed to things you can't yet make sense of in
Hmm.
order to later understand.
Yes.
And uh,
Mm.
so, what the world that an AI or different AIs will produce, I doubt that it will be an exposure to a cultural variety that makes sense to us. It might be all
Hmm.
kinds of things,
Yeah.
but I very much doubt it will be something that makes sense to humans.
Yes.
And in to get back to this paper, I basically uh, conclude with that, in my opinion, the only or the most important parameter to evaluate uh, any cultural development actually is if it improves the communication between humans.
Hmm.
And there I found this beautiful writing from Beethoven, which he wrote on his uh, the original writing of the Missa Solemnis it was, and
Hmm.
and there he writes, "May it go from heart to heart." Yeah?
Hmm.
No, no, actually,
Interesting.
it literally translated, it would be from the heart, may it go back to the heart.
Mm.
And in my opinion, that is the deepest meaning of what music can do and should do in the best sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. That
Interesting.
it connects people,
Mm.
and this I give it to the development of AI, that this might even help in doing research about this. What actually is it that makes us feel connect through music?
Hmm.
This is another thing which is very little researched, but
Yeah.
I also found an interesting study, very recent study from a research group in Zurich, who could show in real life brain scans that music is perceived very differently when it's played live or when it is played from a machine, a recording.
Hmm.
And I think there are many things which is are worthwhile to do further research about to understand better what really matters.
Hmm.
Um,
Yes.
yeah, another thing that worries me is that I already mentioned most people are not really aware of what's happening there,
Hmm.
and but also the people who know what's going on, some of them are well,
Hmm.
simply stupid in my opinion. it
Yeah.
it's There was a big conference 1.5 years ago or so in Berlin about AI and the influence on the music business,
Hmm.
and they also interviewed someone who is counseling the German government in that field, and he seriously suggested that this is not a big problem at all, because we all know what good music is, don't we? And so just let it run, and we will decide if it's good music or not. Yeah, no problem.
Mm.
And and when I heard him say this, uh, I I just couldn't believe it, because this really goes against any understanding about how people learn, how education should work, and it's just incredibly stupid and outright dangerous if such people counsel the people who make decisions about the legal framework in which all this happens.
Hmm. Yeah. Maybe one more point with this regards is the issue of delegation. Now, uh, like having an instrument maker analyzing and thinking about innovating something or coming to a better solution or a better result for a certain purpose, all of a sudden we can delegate this to an AI agent and say, okay, suggest anything or solve the issue in this way or that way. And all of a sudden we take it as is and we implement. I know AI is what we have today, but before we had other tools, as you just have highlighted about 3D printing, about trying to know what study tried to do through analysis, statistics, whatever, and then take it for granted to be the wisdom. This delegation is really a problem, isn't it? Like I'm not going to take a decision, I'll just
Yeah.
delegate and take it from there.
Yeah, well, I think it's not possible. It's to delegate it because after all, it's for us. It is for humans, and then we have to make the decision if it's usable or not.
Mhm.
But there is one aspect, for example, where I could think that AI could actually really help in
Mhm.
exactly that field. For
Mhm.
example, a basic problem every instrument maker has is uh, um, when we all try to improve our instruments, usually, yeah? And
Mhm.
and so we come up with an idea, okay, maybe it would be better when I do this in another way.
Mhm.
So the only safe way to get an answer, if this is a better way, a good idea, is to try it in one instrument and only change one thing at a time and then
Mhm.
compare. But most musical instruments are very complex. So you have already a rather certain variety in the output. Not two
Mhm.
instruments are exactly the same.
Yeah.
So you have to try to reduce the margin of error and just change one thing at a time. But then you have uh, one instrument which is different. And
Mm.
if it's better, then you can think, okay, maybe it's because of that little change I made on that bar or something.
Mhm.
So normally one lifetime is not enough to really to develop anything in that way. Huh? It's
Mhm.
because you would have to get a statistically reliable answer to a specific question. One instrument is not
Yeah.
enough. You would have to build at least 10, let's say, with the same change. And then you would know,
Mm.
okay, this is really better.
Mm.
But that's for a normal instrument maker, that's practically impossible. So there is usually
Yeah.
a lot of intuition involved and uh, um, but if we come up with a really good mathematical model of an instrument, and that is quite possible in with many instruments, uh, uh, either through um, infinite elements method, where we basically divide the whole instrument in very small triangles. And a triangle is very good for calculation, obviously. And so you practically turn the instrument into a grid of tiny triangles, and then you can calculate it. That is one very good method for that, such a purpose. The other is that you use so-called modal analysis, and where you actually measure the vibrations of the instruments and create a model of the modes. The modes are the two-dimensional fields which are vibrating, and create a model based on that. And
Yeah.
with both methods, you can get a rather good model of an instrument. But even with the most simple approach, which would be a simple spring mass model, which you practically consider each important part of the instrument, the soundboard, the back, the neck, let's say, and describe it as a simple spring mass model, meaning you give it a defined mass, a defined tension, and a defined elasticity. And then you can calculate how it would, and you add a defined damping. Then you can calculate a model how this instrument will sound. And even with that, you can get surprisingly good models. So if you have such a model, then you could theoretically make changes to that model and define and look for changes, what works. And
Yeah.
that, of course, would allow you to run through hundreds of variations of a certain change, and what you could never do in a lifetime. And
Yes.
that might possibly be a help for an instrument maker to choose. Okay, now I had it run through the AI, and according to that, it's probably best to do it like this. Yeah?
Yes.
So in that sense, you could use it to narrow it down. That
Excellent.
might be possible.
Yeah, for sure, there are a lot of great applications. And here we supervise,
Yeah,
we guide, we supervise, we give the data, we give the sources,
yeah.
we build the model, the agents, how things work. We can make use of, but over reliance or complete delegation and making it supervise us, this is really
Mm,
an issue.
yeah,
Uh, I think it's worth to take an intermission here. We have
yeah,
more stuff to cover. Maybe a suggestion, Sebastian,
yeah.
of something to see together with our Nadi viewers.
Um, there was something I thought about earlier, which would right. I actually, since I mentioned this old customer of mine, I actually
Mm,
uh, uh, had asked him to if I could record him, and I made
mhm,
a recording of him in my workshop where I had him actually played this old guitar I made for him in 1996. And then I gave him a newer guitar, which was at that time 2 years old or so, maybe. And
mhm,
then I cut these two parts together.
mm.
And
Interesting.
yeah, and that is
Mm,
would tie in nicely with that topic. I would say, I would think. I can send you a link
interesting.
to that.
Sure. We'll see it then and come back.
Yeah, okay.
So thanks, Sebastian, actually, for this video. Maybe let's take the wisdom part of what is a good instrument, and if there is any criteria that could maybe guide us on that.
Yeah. Well, when we uh, ask the question, what is a good anything?
Mm,
Then first of all, we have to be clear that it's always we're asking about a function, right? We're asking about a purpose. What is this instrument
mm,
supposed to serve? What purpose does
mm,
it have? And that is obviously subject to change over time, even in one's own life. It might
mm,
change dramatically, and so that's a basic question. What do we want to use it for?
mhm,
And having that said, it's of course you can define criteria about what a specific good instrument is.
mhm,
In from my experience, uh, um, uh, there is at the same time always a rather a divergence about the opinion what is a good instrument, but
mhm,
uh, usually you also find a common core where there is a great consent among people what is a good instrument. With a classical guitar, for example, everybody wants to have a good balance and sonorous basses and
mhm,
uh, uh, singing trebles, uh, uh, possibly a lot of sustain. So there is an core ideal sound.
mm,
But when you come to different musical environments, you will see, okay, there are variations.
mhm,
For example, when you come to the environment of flamenco,
mm,
suddenly the aspect of percussion, the attack of the sound, the
mhm,
the speed of decay has a very different importance, and
mm,
it's a very different thing altogether. With the oud, it's even more diverse, I would say. Uh, um, there's also a core sound, yeah, which I would say is
mhm,
like the essence of the very being of this instrument. As I
mhm,
mentioned before, I really see instrument like living creatures, like beings, and they have
mhm,
uh, uh, yeah, something typical about them. And so with the oud, of course, also there is very basic mutual qualities, but as it's being used in so different musical contexts and different musical cultures, there's also a
yeah,
great variety. An oud player from the Gulf area has very different idea about what is a good oud than an oud player from Turkey, for example.
mm,
And uh, and I hope we keep this variety. Would be a pity if it
mhm,
disappears.
yeah,
And so uh, I would suggest that also it ties in with what I said earlier,
mhm,
that a good instrument is one that allows a musician a maximum of freedom and expression, and which
mhm,
allows the musician to translate his musical ideas
yeah,
and convey it to other people. So that would be my definition of a good instrument.
mhm,
There are
yeah,
that is, of course, a very rather abstract definition, which is only concerned about the function. Then there
Mm-hmm.
are, of course, as many as you like, sub-levels of the material, of the craftsmanship, and of the longevity of the development of the
Mm-hmm.
instrument, of the beauty, and I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the visual beauty of an instrument obviously has very little to do with its function.
Mm-hmm.
Still, personally, I could never live with an ugly instrument because I mean, you you see it you see it every day, and that affects you. And if you just imagine you see your violin, and every day, every time you see it, you think, "Oh my God, is this ugly?" Yeah? You wouldn't like to
Mm.
play it.
Mm. Yes.
So we perceive everything with all our senses. Also the smell. I mean, this sounds maybe
Mm.
a bit ridiculous, but the smell of an instrument matters to me as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
The
well,
touch, the
the touch,
touch,
of course, yeah,
we are
yeah,
handling it, and yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
Interesting.
I actually, I think it's 25 years ago or so. Or I don't know, yeah, about 25 years ago, I wrote a list of tips how to test an instrument,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, uh, well, gave a number of tips what I think is a good way to do it. And in the end, I say, well, inevitably there will come a point where you don't know what you hear anymore. You know, you've concentrated so hard, and maybe you compare different instruments, and then in the end, you don't know what you hear. It's like if you want to find a perfume, yeah, and you test different perfumes. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you have smelled 10 different, you don't know what you like anymore. It's too much. Yeah.
You need coffee then.
Yeah.
What is coffee in the wood
Yeah.
benchmarking?
Well, my suggestion is that
Yeah.
if you reach that point, then you just forget all about the sound and the playability, and you just feel, okay, how does it feel to hold the instrument? Huh? Do you
Mm.
feel comfortable with it? Does it feel nice? Are you happy to hold it? Huh? Because that also matters a lot, because when you play an instrument, you hold it for rather a long time, don't you? It's really
Mm-hmm.
might be hours every day, and then this really matters. And
Mm.
and so the suggestion is actually to practically relieve your ears and focus on another sense. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
But all these senses are involved, and they all matter. And
Interesting. Yeah. Sebastian, I think talking about tips and so on, you have given courses and workshops for students for instrument making. What do you do in those workshops?
well, mainly I've actually been teaching musicians about understanding their instruments
Mm.
better,
Mm-hmm.
and mostly in Salzburg in Austria, in the famous Mozarteum University, and and that was uh, a great thing. I really love doing it. I
Mm-hmm.
still do, and but I stopped working there, and and uh, I was actually asked to design such a course. It didn't exist before, and then I thought about it, and I thought, okay, if I want to make musicians understand the instrument better, they have to understand the basics of
Mm.
acoustics, and that is difficult because I think my course was 30 hours. And I thought, okay,
Mm.
I also want to cover a lot of other subjects. How can I teach them even the most basics of acoustics in so little time. And then I came up with a model which I taught them, and this model basically combines the three of the four major aspects of sound, and and I explained these to the students and gave them some exercises to understand how these three factors influence each other. And I promised them, and I usually could keep that promise, that if they had understood the interrelations of these three factors, they could evaluate the sound of any plucked instrument by playing just a few notes on it,
Yeah.
or maybe even by just tapping on the soundboard. And but so one of the main things I was teaching them was basics of acoustics, because that is simply the basic to understand anything about the instrument and to understand what problems you have with the instrument also. I usually started the course with a hearing test, because I found that when you want to talk about sound, you need terms, terminology to talk about it.
Yeah.
What I did is I always ask a student, they always had to bring their instruments. I always ask a student to play two very different guitars. I looked what was available and then chose the most two different ones. And to play a short piece of music on these two guitars. And then I asked the students to describe what they had heard. And it was strictly forbidden to say this is better than that, or this is, yeah.
Yeah.
Good or bad was forbidden. They were only allowed to describe the sound qualities. And it was every time I've done this, I don't know, with 20 groups of students or so, it was every time the same story. They first gave very few answers. It was like, okay, one guitar sounds a bit warmer, the other is a bit louder, one is a bit dark, this is a bit brighter, or and
Nicer.
yeah, and that was about it. Yeah?
Yeah.
And after that, I would talk with them. Okay, what qualities has sound? What quality has a sound, a note played, and talk about attack, decay, sustain, the mixture of overtones, the envelope, so-called envelope of the note, and the transition period at the beginning, how the note like is blooming up, and all these different aspects of the sound. The difference in decay in different overtones, and such things.
Yeah.
And after talking about this, I repeated exactly the same test, the same student playing the same two guitars with the same piece. And then I would always look in very surprised faces. And that was a great joy for me. And then the students were surprised because suddenly they realized they were hearing things they hadn't heard before.
Unnamed.
Yeah. And then I
Yeah.
was again writing on the blackboard now the usually plenty descriptions of what they had heard. And the takeaway, of course, was you need to have a name for something to put it in your consciousness. And of course, they
Interesting.
had they had heard everything before, but it didn't reach their conscious mind because they had no name for it.
Interesting.
And
Interesting.
so that Then we went on a bit developing terminology about what do we mean when we say this sounds warm, or what is a warm sound? Yeah, what does it mean?
Yeah.
And to get a clearer idea, and 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 that can get very practical. I mean, when let's go with this example. When you say, for example, what is a warm sound? Yeah, I would say, okay, that is usually a sound which rather have a rather long transient beginning stage, so not a sharp attack.
Mm.
Then it has a prominent lower overtones
Mm.
and no specific or very strong high over notes. So it's like it's not piercing or anything. Yeah? And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we uh, uh, call a warm sound. And
Mm.
you can even get more specific or use the violin makers, for example, they use the, uh, the vowels R, E, I, O, U to
Mm.
describe sounds, which is not a bad system in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And these vowels, obviously, they have very specific signatures of overtones and frequency ranges. And so it's a bit complex and
Mm-hmm.
abstract. But since our perception is very much based on the human voice,
Yeah.
that is kind of the master model of everything. It makes a lot of sense to actually use these vowels.
Yes.
Actually, it occurs to me right now that it would be very interesting to conduct studies about different how this is affected in different cultures using different languages. For
Mm-hmm.
example, Arabic has very different phonemes from German or French. Huh?
Yeah. Yes.
And I'm sure that also affects the way music is perceived. But
Interesting.
I don't know if any research has been done in that field, but would be very interesting, in my opinion.
Yeah. What I like about what you do, Sebastian, uh, really, and this is what I have seen so far, more hidden. The way you treat things by the hands-on experience together with the scientific practical approach. So we are not over treating science with being sacred. So science is not a religion. So we do it pragmatically, and at the same time, it's all based on not a theoretical, isolated concept rather than a hands-on experience. And uh, this is really wonderful, and we see results in your work. I
Thanks a
don't
lot.
want to miss,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't want to miss the three things and three interrelated things that you mentioned in
Mhm.
your promise to your students. Can you highlight their names?
Yes, of course I can. It's
Otherwise, Nadi viewers will kill me.
yeah, well, it doesn't make that much sense without a bit more extensive explanations, but basically these three aspects
Hmm.
uh, uh, is one is I call admittance, which is
Hmm.
the inversion of impedance. Impedance, most
Hmm.
people know. It
Yeah.
basically admittance is the reverse of impedance. It's based the amount of energy transferred in a certain amount of time.
Hmm.
And you could, it's not the same, but to simplify it further, you could say it's the attack of the instrument, the way
Hmm.
attack is processed.
Yes.
But I chose to use the term admittance
Hmm.
because it's other than attack, it's a physically defined dimension. And
Hmm.
uh, the the second factor is I called sustain,
Hmm.
by which with plugged instrument you you understand basically how long the note lasts. There's often some
Hmm.
confusion because the acousticians understand
Mm.
sustain in a different way. They take it as the way the vibration is on the same level. It's not losing energy. Then comes
Yeah.
the decay. But since all the musicians of plucked instruments understand sustain in a different way, I use that word. So that's the second one.
Mm.
And the third one is the internal mechanical damping.
Mm.
These are the three factors,
Hmm.
and it's you can give in my classes I gave them tasks and
Hmm.
and questions actually to solve, which quickly made them understand the nature of these three factors,
Hmm.
mostly by designing extreme models, yeah, where one of the three was exaggerated, as it were. And then it's rather
Hmm.
easy to understand what's going on. And with
Mm.
with this model, you actually create a, I never did because as a researcher, I'm very lazy, I have to admit. I'm
Maybe you don't have time. Yeah.
Yeah, that is the true reason, I guess. It's
Yeah.
uh, but I always had the idea it would be lovely to actually write a computer program where you can create or show a three-dimensional space.
Yeah.
You could give a value to each of these three parameters, these three aspects.
Yes.
And with that, you could kind of give a specific place in this three-dimensional space,
Mm.
defining a specific instrument.
Mm.
But that was just a nice idea. But since it
Yeah.
has no practical value, I also never did it. At
Maybe you
least,
get sponsored for that soon.
yeah, I,
Yeah.
uh, I then doing this work with the students. In the end, I always had to tease them and by asking the question, okay, there is a fourth very important aspect
Mm.
that I have ignored here, and what is
Mm.
it? And once in a while, there was a student who actually found the answer. And this fourth aspect is the dynamic aspect,
Mm.
the loudness of the instrument
Mm.
and or the dynamic range. And that is obviously very important, but I left it out because it has, for my purpose of understanding how an instrument functions, plugged instrument functions,
Hmm.
it is not of great importance. It is of great
Yeah.
importance to any musician, of course, yeah?
Yeah.
But I simply left it out to keep things
Simpler.
simpler, and
Mm.
and I'm pointing it out now so that nobody
Mm.
comes and complains that I left it out.
To me, when you describe it, I imagine it as three circles of Venn diagram where we can move the points toward one of them, or maybe make them four
Mm,
Venn circles,
yeah,
uh, like a Venn diagram of three circles or four circles. And this is really interesting how you came up with these three particular
yeah.
dimensions or
As I said,
factors. Yeah.
actually I came up with that model just thinking about how I can tell you a small anecdote which is
Mm.
relevant to that, because when I started my apprenticeship in 1989,
Mm.
one of the first things I experienced was that I think I wasn't even in the workshop with my teacher for 2 weeks or so, and uh, he had an appointment with a world famous guitarist to show him one of his guitars,
Hmm.
and we went there, and this guitarist was giving group lessons to his students. And so he was rather busy. And then in between, he just said, okay, now give me this guitar and I'll try it. And then he played just like 3, 4 notes in the upper registers, in the upper frets of the
Hmm.
guitar on the high E string. And then he said, this is not good. And he gave the guitar
Hmm.
back to my teacher.
Hmm.
And my teacher was devastated. It was, of course, also a very rude behavior, you could say. It was
Hmm.
not very polite, to say the least.
Yeah.
And when we rather soon left and then went home, and my teacher was in a very bad mood for the next 2 days. It was like a black cloud hanging over his head. And on the third day, he burst out. And the worst thing is, he's right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
there was something in this which somehow bothered me, which I thought there is something I have to understand. And I could see in that class that this guitar professor, he was brilliant. He was a brilliant teacher, and uh, I thought either he's just a very impolite, rude person, or he knows something I don't understand. Uh,
Hmm.
how can he just play 3 notes and then give a general
Conclusion.
judgment evaluation of the instrument?
Yeah.
And and I wanted to find out how he did that. I thought there is something in it, and that actually made me think. And basically, this model I years later developed for the students. I would say
Hmm.
the initial spark was in that experience
Hmm.
that there
Interesting.
is and when I uh, uh, came up with this model, or rather with the understanding which allowed me to come up with this model, I, I I realized that this guitar professor, he had an intuitive understanding. I
Mm.
don't think he had a physical, scientific understanding, but clearly he had an intuitive understanding of how things relate in a
Hmm.
guitar, and that allowed him to just playing these 3 notes and draw conclusions and make an evaluation about the whole instrument.
Hmm.
I would,
Interesting. That's like
yeah,
a one thing that you do and you have a conclusion. Very simple test.
yeah, but
Yeah.
it's very. Uh, I would say that probably most good instrument makers will agree that when they build an
Mm.
instrument, they know how it sounds before they put on strings the first time.
Mm.
Because when you work on the instrument, yeah, when you work with tools or just you just touch it, it
Mm.
responds.
Mm.
And the way it responds is the same way if you touch it or if you put a string on it and pluck it.
Yeah.
So the basic qualities in the response will all be there even before
Hmm.
you put on strings the first time. And
Mm.
so if the understanding is there, you can make such an evaluation just from even touching an instrument, I would say.
Interesting. Interesting. Do you continue to teach this or you get requests for such workshops?
Sometimes I'll do, and I also taught workshops in Magnerkirchen, for example,
Mm.
and and I hope that there is more interest again, or I hope that I will have
Mm.
time to do more teaching because I really enjoy it.
Hmm.
And but also next year I will turn 60, and I'm very aware that the number of instruments I can make is limited.
Mm,
And I feel or I wish to share my knowledge. And so
mm,
I'm also feel, okay, this is the number of instruments I can still make is very limited. And maybe it's even more important to share my knowledge. So
mhm,
so and I by that I also I would like to include the centuries of tradition
mm,
that I'm just a small link in a chain.
mhm.
But um, brings me back to what we spoke about earlier. This
Yeah.
chain is being in danger of being cut.
Mhm.
And if I can do something to help to prevent that, I would be very
Yeah.
fulfilling for me. So that's also
Mhm.
why I hope to devote more time again to teaching.
Mhm.
But you know how it is. You only have so many hours a day, and there
Yeah.
are dishes to be done, and garden to be watered, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Hopefully this happens more frequently, but the thing is, it's 30 hours mostly, right? You said 30 hours or a week
That was
time?
the course I taught there in Salzburg.
Mm-hmm.
It can be any amount of time. I've been giving workshops from like 2 hours, which of course you can't do very
Yeah.
little. But even
Mm.
for that, I had well,
Tailor the
we
material
devised
and
something that makes
experience.
sense.
Mm.
And commonly it's 2 days, which in 2 days you can do something meaningful. And of course, if you really want to convey, it's better to be a lot longer, because there is also a different in teaching, in just teaching, or teaching in working together. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's what I also have done, which I think is also very meaningful, and I actually greatly enjoy. Uh, um, I've done that, for example, in Magnerkirchen also with the students which are doing their master studies,
Mm.
or at the end of their bachelor. They show me instruments they have finished, and we discuss them. And
Mm-hmm.
and my impression is that it was always very helpful for them to
Yeah.
because uh, the most helpful in my opinion is when I can point out inconsistencies in their construction, or even contradictions in their constructions which they were not aware of.
Mm.
Like, then I can show them, okay, you worked in a way that I can see you wanted to let's say you wanted to get a very fast attack, yeah? But then
Mm-hmm.
you glued in this bar here, which kind of destroys all the effort you've made in other spots. Yeah. So
Yeah.
why did you do that? Yeah. Was it intentional, or didn't you think about what this would do? Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Most cases turns out they hadn't thought about it in that way, and
Mm-hmm.
and then I can help them to understand that consistency in the construction is one of the most important things to get good results, and especially repeatable uh, uh,
Mm-hmm.
results. It's
Mm-hmm.
I would say that almost anyone in with some craft skills would be capable to build an instrument,
Mm-hmm.
and it might even come out good. but to
Hmm.
consistently build good instrument, that is what for me defines a master.
Yes.
And that is only possible when you have, first of all, a clear understanding of what you're doing and why you're doing it like this,
Hmm.
and that as a consequence of this understanding, you come up with a construction which is consistent in itself and not contradictory.
Hmm.
Because when you have a construction which is has internal contradictions, then in one instrument one side will prevail, in the next maybe the other, and then you have
Yeah.
a very inconsistent output. And so that's a very
Interesting.
very important point.
Hmm.
And these 2 points, in my opinion, are more important than anything else. It's more important than the material and even than the accuracy. I mean, these are
Mm.
also important points, but not as important as the understanding and the consistency of the construction. And
Hmm.
so if I can guide a younger colleague to find
Mm.
his personal approach, that is also very, very nice work.
Yeah.
But that
Interesting.
also, of course, is only possible in a if the infrastructure is there, let's say instrument making schools. And so that reminds
Mm.
me to what we talked about at the beginning, and what happened in Scandinavia and so on. Uh,
Hmm.
just last week, I learned that in the UK there is a Newark instrument making school in, I think, near the Scottish border, and it's one, maybe the biggest instrument making school in the UK, or if
Hmm.
maybe the second biggest, and they're going to close it.
Mm.
And that's when I saw this, I said, "Oh my God, this is it's yeah,
It's
what to
very
say."
sad to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I
there,
think
yeah.
mhm.
No, go on, please.
Such, yeah, I mean, such workshop or a week of exposure to these experiences in a practical level are fruitful to both instrument makers or musicians as well.
Yeah, to both,
Yeah,
of course. There are some things which are very important for both makers and musicians. There are things, of course, which are not relevant to musicians at all when it really comes to the crafts and so on. But
yeah,
uh, um, even about material with musicians, I really like to talk about it, but because I found that they often have very wrong ideas. For example, what is good sound, good tone wood, and
mhm,
they think that in a spruce soundboard, it's very important how narrow the annual rings are, and that is, in my opinion, a very secondary
common
matter.
mistakes.
It doesn't matter
Mm.
so much, but because you can easily see it and count it, it's people tend to think it's important.
Yeah.
And so even that is interesting for musicians, I would say,
Mm.
for some at least. And also many other things. I mean, um, topics like what types of varnish are there, and such things. And
Mhm. Interesting.
so there are
Interesting.
many things which are interesting for both, but generally I prefer to teach them separately, because
Yeah.
of course each group also has a different existing knowledge you can build on, and so well,
Priorities.
yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, I think this is bringing us to the topic of sound production, and you covered a good portion of such a discussion. But talking about instruments as a living creature or living species, We have, on the other hand, the perception of benchmarking a good sound by the sound of a piano, for example.
Mm. Yeah, that's another good example actually of what
Mhm.
I mentioned in the very beginning with
Mm,
that digitization versus analog sound,
mm,
and as you know, keyboard instruments had a very hard time to establish themselves
mm,
because of the tuning problems.
mhm,
And until, uh, uh, well, actually, until the 19th century, uh, um, the equal temperament was not accepted.
mm,
And we had modal tunings, even in the West.
yeah.
And and that didn't allow for very well for keyboard instruments.
Mm,
And they tried to solve it in the 17th century, and later they built keyboards with divided keys, which I think they were versions with up to 37 keys per octave, and
mhm,
which must have been impossible to play really, but they tried to solve the problem. But the real big breakthrough actually came with the general acceptance of equal temperament.
mm,
And before that, uh, sounds were perceived differently, basically as a uh, continuous spectrum, with certain gravity points, let's say. Yeah?
mm, yeah.
And and there was well, starting with the Pythagorean tuning, and then uh, uh, pure intervals, and then in the West they came up with the different mean tone temperaments, somehow compromising, and first favoring the fifth and avoiding the thirds, then
Mhm,
shifted towards trying to get pure thirds on the
yeah.
expense of the fifth, and so this whole development.
Mhm,
And um, so that is somehow with the acceptance of equal temperament, the road was free for uh, you press the
mhm.
button and there comes the sound, yeah?
Yes.
And no continuous spectrum anymore,
Mhm,
and no analog sound, yeah? Digitized,
mhm,
and it's um, that also changed the way or we perceived music in general. There was this tendency to get louder instruments, and I found a beautiful quote by in a book from I think the 18th century by what's his name? Your last name is Reinhard. Well, never mind. I can
mm.
write it to you. Uh,
Yeah.
where he writes about the experience of hearing Johann Sebastian Bach
Mhm,
improvising on the lute
mm,
with Silvius Leopold Weiss on another lute.
mhm,
Bach was a great lute player, which many people
mm,
know. And and he says it was such an wonderful experience to hear these subtle, fine instruments, and that it would be that it's a great pity that all this is lost in the loud noise we hear today. It was written
mm,
like, I don't know, 70 years later or so.
mhm,
And that is a very nice example of the shift in hearing and what mattered. And
mhm.
well, it culminated in the Steinway grand piano, and that has become for many the ideal of an instrumental sound. Funnily, even for many guitar makers. And I once spoke to a colleague, and he was praising the sound of a Steinway grand piano and saying that this was what he was trying to achieve in his guitars. And
Yeah.
he went on, and I got more and more annoyed with his talk. And in the end, I just told him, well, why don't you build pianos? And
Yes.
uh, uh, well, as I said before, for me it's their species, and a guitar should sound like a guitar, an oud should sound like an oud, a violin should sound like a violin. Of course, there
Mhm,
should be a great variety. Yeah? We have people
mm,
with black skin, we have people with white skin, people with brown skin, and that's all beautiful.
mm.
So uh, I love the variety, but uh, to say I want a guitar to sound like a Steinway grand piano, that for me is stupidity. It's uh,
Yeah. Now talking about the instrument is made for a purpose. From the beginning of any evolution or maybe creation to evolution of these instruments. Uh, uh, there are instruments which talk many languages. If we say music is a language, as you said, cultures. Oud, for example, could play the same instrument by the same artist or musician, playing different flavors of cultures at the same time, and it is a different creature from moment to moment. This is compared to the other extreme of the benchmarking with pianos.
yes, yes,
Yes,
absolutely.
and this comes for sure for the experience of the instrument makers, isn't it? To make an instrument speak multilingual.
Um, yeah, well, I think instrument makers uh, respond to two demands basically. One
Hmm.
is from the outside. It's what the musicians need and want, and the other is from the inside. And for me, for example, there is uh, something in the sound of blackbirds I always
Mm.
loved. I remember when I was a child, I was very often lying in bed waiting to fall asleep in long summer nights when it was still light outside. And on the neighboring house, a blackbird would sit on the antenna and sing. And I just
Mm.
loved it. I was just lying there and listening to that beautiful song.
Hmm.
And that is a sound which still inspires me. And that's
Hmm.
somehow, from the memory of the child in me, it
Hmm.
still prevails in my instrument making in a way I can't really describe, but somehow it's there. It's an
Mm.
inner force driving me.
Yeah.
Actually, later, uh, um, I, I think I was maybe, we think I must have been like 11 years old or so. I had a simple cassette recorder, and then I recorded the song of a blackbird on a cassette, and I tried to figure out on the guitar what melody the blackbird was singing. And I was very surprised to find that the notes were not the note of any scale I knew, yeah,
Hmm.
at different intervals.
Yes.
And at that time, I had, of course, I had no idea what a scale actually is, what intervals are, what is, let alone temperaments.
Mm.
And but later, I often had to think back how I tried to figure out the melody of the blackbird when
Hmm.
when I came to know Oriental music, modal music,
Hmm.
and started to understand what actually is going on, yeah, the whole story.
Interesting.
And so
Yeah.
there are these two demands on the instrument maker, and it's uh, I think there's also a great variety of instrument makers. I mean, there are some which I would say are mere craftsmen. They
Mm.
just build an instrument like they would build a chair or a table,
Hmm.
and they have a certain way to do it, and they do it, and they sell it, and everybody is happy.
Hmm.
And there is another type of instrument maker which is more like an artist. He wants to express something and wants to develop his own expression of his art.
Hmm.
And uh, uh, obviously, I count myself to the second category.
Hmm.
There's no evaluation in that. It's just both fine, both has its value.
Yeah. Hmm.
And, and um, actually, sometimes I would wish I would be a little bit more of the first type, because then my output would probably be a lot higher.
Yeah.
What to do? And it also, for me, that also means uh, uh, I can't do something I have no inner demand to do. I
Mm.
have been asked, it happened very rarely because there are many filters before that stage that somebody actually orders an instrument. But it happened two, three times maybe that I actually declined to accept and commission because I knew it just was going against my inner demand. I mean, there is of
Mm.
course I'm happy to oblige a customer in many ways,
Hmm.
but there are things I can't compromise on. And
Mm.
if the request is asking for that, I have to decline. So
Mm.
so there is that brings us to the topic of actually interaction between musician and instrument maker.
Yeah.
And I really wish for uh, this relationship to be strengthened and improve, which also needs education. I
Mm.
mean, this relationship has obviously it's been always there. It's the musician needs
Hmm.
the instrument maker and vice versa,
Yeah.
and one can't be without the other, except when you are a singer. And so it's an intrinsic,
Mm.
vital relationship, and also one of the fields in musicology which practically has never been researched. It's another terra incognita, I would say.
Mhm.
And I actually, in this conference, I suggested to open up such a field of uh, uh, social organology, or
Mm.
I called it, to research this interaction
Mhm.
and uh, it is, as I saw in this course, especially I've been teaching in Salzburg, musicians profit greatly from understanding the instrument better, but it also
Hmm.
goes the other way around. Also, the instrument maker is profiting immensely when he understands the musicians better. What are
Hmm.
their problem? What are their needs? What are they struggling with? Huh? And
Yeah.
and so it's absolutely a win-win situation to bring the two parties which belong together closer together and get a more exchange.
Yeah.
But that is needs education, needs a common language, needs some basic understanding of acoustics. And it's not
Hmm.
difficult to reach such a level where such an exchange is possible and fruitful.
Yeah. Interesting.
And
Interesting.
yeah,
Sebastian, now, is it a challenge or maybe a more challenging a process to produce an instrument that talks several languages for a
yes,
maker?
yes, that is
Hmm.
very clearly yes.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Uh, um, it's Let me give you a simple example.
Hmm.
Not that simple actually, but um, in with flamenco guitars, I would say that it's more difficult to build a really good flamenco guitar than a good classical guitar. The reason is that the flamenco guitars is asking the modern flamenco guitar, that is asking for very different languages. Uh,
Hmm.
the modern players, they want a flamenco guitar which is very percussive, with a rather aggressive fast sound, uh,
Hmm.
rather fast decay, not too much sustain. And because otherwise with these rasgueado techniques they use, everything would blur together, yeah? And so that's what they need. But
Yeah.
they in modern flamenco music they often play very melodic falsettas, they call it, melody lines, which
Hmm.
which are they want to sound lyrically and sustained, beautiful sound.
Hmm.
And that, from an instrument maker's viewpoint, is totally contradictory.
Hmm.
So that's a big challenge. How do you solve this contradiction?
Yes.
And the answer is you have to, or what I do is like I kind of use different parts of the instruments to accommodate these different needs.
Hmm.
It's never fully possible, but you can reach some compromise there. But that is indeed very challenging.
Yeah.
It would be similar if you ask me to make an oud, which is both useful in the traditional folk music of Bahrain and
Hmm.
uh, uh, Turkish classical music. Yeah, or so
Yes.
that would be a similar challenge, and it is always if I have such requests, I always really collaborate with the musician and discuss, isn't it the better solution to have two instruments, yeah,
Hmm.
instead of trying to make a compromise? Or uh, uh, I suggest something and say, okay, I think I can do this. I can make this
Yeah.
compromise, and I think it will satisfy both needs.
Hmm.
Maybe not
Yes.
100%, but maybe 80%. And And then the musician says, that's okay. If I get 80%, I rather have
Mhm.
one instrument than travel with two. Yeah. So it's
Interesting. Interesting. And I
yeah,
think this collaboration, Sebastian, that you mentioned between the expert musician and the expert maker, that makes this possible. And
yes,
that's why, for example, violin, as I always closely look into, where we see it speak several cultures, but it's also towards the experience of the musician, him or herself, how they approach the instrument for certain culture, even if it is the same instrument.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, same tuning or variations here and there. So my next question on this topic of sound production, and then we move on, is what do we learn from the playable old instruments existing today about sound production?
Um, well, that's a very interesting question,
Yeah.
and th there are some problems with that because the first problem is how can we know how these old instruments, if they are still playable at all, how
Mm-hmm.
have they really sounded? Because after 200, 300, or how many years, the instrument changed, and
Mm-hmm.
and they will not sound like they sounded 200 years ago.
Yeah.
So how can we know that? Then, in many cases, the instrument is not playable anymore. Uh, then we are totally at a loss how they might have sounded. In many cases, we don't even know the pitch in which they were tuned if it's a stringed instruments, because
Mm-hmm.
in the largest part of recorded musical history, all kinds of different pitches were used.
Mm-hmm.
And the only clue you often have is if there is still an old organ in a church, which is like
Mm.
300 years old, and then you can calculate, or you can see from the length of the pipes, you can calculate the pitch, and then you know,
Yeah.
aha, they had an A-tuned 556 hertz, or an
Mm-hmm.
A-tuned 418 hertz, or whatever. Huh? And
Mm.
in the next village, they might have played a different pitch. Yeah? It's so
Yeah.
that is another aspect. There was I actually started to plan for a project with two musicologists. Uh, uh, we found in the museum in Magnerkirchen, there's a very interesting musical instrument museum, and we found they had three ouds which haven't been touched ever
Mm.
since they became part of the collection, which was, I believe, I think it was 1880, 1880,
Mm.
which means that these three ouds are among the very few, among the oldest ouds we have at all. And they seem to
Which
be,
origin?
one was from Syria, I think one from Egypt, I think
Mm.
one was from what's now Lebanon. But
Mm.
I have I made pictures of all of them, but and right now I don't
Mm-hmm.
remember exactly.
Yeah.
And we have drafted a proposal for a research project, and my part in that project would be to make copies of one or two of these ouds,
Mm-hmm.
and we will also have copies of the original strings made,
Mm-hmm.
and based on that, and then see how these copies will sound, because these instruments you can't play anymore. If you would
Hmm.
put on strings, they would probably just collapse. Yeah, and,
Hmm.
and so with still a rather high margin of error, this would be the best way, in my opinion, to try to find out how these instruments, these ouds, might have sounded when they were
Hmm.
new, by trying to make as exact copies as possible.
Yeah.
And this can only be done by an experienced instrument maker, because when you make such a copy, you have to understand what is important and what is not. Yeah?
Hmm.
The big drop of glue in the corner is not important for the sound. Yeah? But the material and the orientation of the grain in the bars is. Yeah?
Yeah.
And so uh, but that was only one part of this project.
Hmm.
And I don't know if we'll get any funding to ever do it, but the concept or the idea is there. Uh, the next step would be to see if when we have a copy we can play with the original strings, what can that tell us about the music that was probably played on that instrument?
Hmm.
And I'm sure that we will be able to draw conclusions from the sound properties of the specific instrument. And we might even elicit from the original instrument some indicators of what was played. For example, I mean, on the fingerboard, you can see if a note is played a lot, it will wear out
Yeah.
the fingerboard more. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that can be some indicators of what they played. If you can see, okay, it seems they only ever played this makam and nothing else.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is long before there was any recordings, and there
Yes.
wasn't any scores written or anything. So
Hmm.
we really know very little about what music they really played.
Interesting.
And I think that is a very new but a very interesting approach to take, where it really
Yeah.
remains to be seen what we can conclude and elicit from the instrument about the music that was probably played. But my guess is that we would be rather surprised how much we will find there is to find.
Yes.
And,
Yes. Yes.
and
Interesting.
yeah, I think it's really very interesting. That, of
Yeah.
course, is another thing which is very time demanding. So
Hmm.
so even if we get funding and start with it, uh, um,
It will impact
actually
other
when
activities.
when when my colleague was telling me, okay, he has written this proposal, but it probably will take at least a year till we get the funding or not. And I said, oh, can you make it 2 years? Because I was really worried. Okay, we have to start this, and you know how it goes. You really have a time frame till which you will
Yeah.
have to have it finished, and it's a huge project. So well, we will see.
Yes. Interesting. Uh, the connection and between innovations and traditions in the making of instruments. So, how free are we in innovation versus what we have got already from the traditions in the making of instruments? This is like a conflict between two things.
Um, no, it is not at all. And and tradition is I mean, the word practically means to pass on. It connotates movement. It's not something dead. We often have, when we use words like traditional music or so, we refer to it from something of the past, and of course it comes from the past, but everything comes from the past, and in innovation is not a contradiction. It's a prerequisite for that movement. So it's not contradictory at all, but it's without innovation, there can't be any tradition, because what you pass on otherwise is just dead. But that brings me back to my concept of a organic or harmonious evolution of instruments or anything else for that matter, which I think is very important. And there can be a breach of this continuous organic process. And an innovation can be both things, as we talked about it earlier. But a meaningful innovation is never a breach of the tradition, but it's only an evolution of the tradition. So that is,
Yeah.
and a musical instrument, or most musical instruments, are so complex that no single person could have invented one. And it's actually quite amazing when you try to look back where was the first oud, where was the first guitar. You can never tell. I mean,
Yeah.
you find similar predecessors, and but you can never really say this was patient zero, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah.
There, there isn't. It's. I mean, it really goes back in a long past, and then
Mhm.
they come up with the plucked instruments. They always come up with a story. Okay, it was from bow and arrow. Yeah, it was,
Yeah.
and then they attached a pumpkin to the bow, and then you have a berimbau. Yeah, and that's how the plucked instruments were developed. But
Yeah.
uh, I would like to say maybe it was the other way around. Yeah? Who knows? Huh?
Yes.
Maybe they had something like a harp, and then they said, "Oh, we can shoot arrows with this." Yeah? Unlikely, I admit, but just for argument's sake. And
Interesting.
and well, so I'm getting too long, but there is no contradiction between tradition and innovation. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But I think there is a great meaning in, let's say, lineage, that the knowledge is passed on.
Mhm.
And I very much doubt that this is possible with YouTube videos. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Sebastian, if we have like a soaring review, a quick review on what's going on for the wood making today, there is the Arab world, Turkey, Iran, and other places, I would say, including yourself and Germany. So
Yeah.
how do you see that, like from a critical eye?
Um, I see it also both ways. On one side, I think
Yeah.
there are many very talented and good oud makers. Uh, and on the other side, I see the danger of uh, everything becoming equal and flat, and um, but uh, again, the remedy is education. What is needed?
Mm.
I actually I found an interesting piece of information in Rachel Beckles-Wilson's book about the oud, a very beautiful book just
Mm.
published last year.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, and there she gives the information that the Turkish oud industry was set up by a German engineer,
Mm.
and in it was called in by Ataturk, or I don't know who saw
Mm-hmm.
the value of saving the old traditions and instruments. And so he brought in this guy and who set up an industrial production of ouds and other instruments.
Yeah.
And I really would like to I have to ask her. I want to know more about this and find out
Mm.
more about this story. But when I read this, I thought, now I understand why all these Turkish ouds look the same. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There really is
Yeah.
a rather little variety in dimensions, in shapes, and so on in Turkey, and that kind of explains to me why it was kind of standardized by a German. That's kind of the
Yes.
well, and and well, so what's going on? I think there is a, a, in oud music, a lot is happening. I mean, for very sad reasons. Many oud players and oud makers were forced out of their homelands and were forced to settle elsewhere in the world. But that also brought the oud around the world, and with its very intimate and human sound. I think it's also very attractive for many people who do all kinds of music and want
Mm.
to bring in some new sound quality somehow. And since it is
Mhm.
so versatile, the oud can be brought in easily in all kinds of music styles.
Mhm.
And so I think we will see in pop music, folk music, and so we will see more and more ouds being played. And that also has a good side and a bad side. The good side is this beautiful instrument becomes better known. The bad side is there is the danger of it losing its mother tongue, let's say.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
but well, uh, again, education is the remedy, and
Mhm.
and so that basically I see very positive that the interest in the oud is growing, and I also experience when I'm in music universities, and they're here, of course, they're mainly guitarists. There's actually only one place in Germany where you can study oud in
Mhm.
Mannheim, and there is a big interest among guitarists when they hear or see that I'm also making ouds. I often hear, "Oh, I love oud. It's such a great sound,
Mm.
and I would like to try one, but I don't know where to get one, how to play on it, and so on." But I can
Mhm.
see there is a great interest there, and so I think there is a really good future for the oud.
Yeah.
There is also
Mm.
a great need to preserve the different languages. And there, everything I said earlier about the influence of AIs on music in general applies, of course. There is
Hmm.
a great danger for
Hmm.
whole cultures to become extinguished. Some years ago in Marseille, there was a beautiful exhibition from the Ammar Foundation in Lebanon, the
Hmm.
uh, Arabic Music Archive, what is called? Well,
Research. Yeah.
research, yeah, right,
Yeah.
foundation.
Mm.
And the exhibition was uh, showing what many ethnomusicologists had managed to conserve videos and audios of music cultures which at the time of the exhibition were already gone extinct.
Mm.
And when I went through this, you could go through this exhibition with headphones and to listen to the music, and it brought tears to my eyes many times to see this
Hmm.
beautiful cultures and knowing, okay, this guy, this old man, who was the last performer of this type of music, and now he's dead, and this video is all that
Mm.
is left. Yeah, it's really very sad, and
Mm.
I think this is a very important work, and I hope this. I I asked if this exhibition is shown elsewhere, and they said, yeah, they plan to bring it to New York, but only in a smaller scale, and I think this is so
Mm.
important. Yeah? This should go around the world. Yeah?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that is really important, and we can only each do our little bit.
Mhm.
And I mean, you with the Anadi podcast are doing a fantastic work in that respect. Yeah? It's
Thank you.
I'm very grateful for the efforts you made
It's
on
all by the courtesy of my guests, actually. One of them.
both sides, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah? And that is exactly
Yeah.
what I mean. We need to build these human networks. That is
Hmm.
absolutely essential. We mustn't allow that it's all taken over by AIs and
Yes. Yes. So maybe the last question, and I really enjoy the discussion. It can go forever with you. Last question is, where would you like to see the instrument making go?
ah well, I would like to find more support for culture in general, and
Mm.
I actually have drafted a proposal I maybe one day send to the German government. But with the new Minister of Culture, I have lost all hope, unfortunately. I should
Mm.
have done it a lot earlier. And I want to propose that we establish a system like they have in Japan, where artisans uh, can be get a status of how do they call it? Uh, um, a living um, a living cultural heritage, as it were. Yeah?
Mhm.
And and because that is really what it is. I mean, culture is as I understand it, is defined by artists, and
Mm.
each of which is irreplaceable.
Mm.
And so this approach the Japanese took, I think, is very important and valuable and meaningful. And already now, in the world we live in today, you can see that practically everybody has furniture which is made industrially, yeah, from IKEA or whatever. And and the understanding for what a real good piece of furniture is has practically disappeared in the younger generation. They can't even recognize it when they see it. And that is, I don't want to happen this to music.
Mm.
So and of course also not to instrument making. So
Mm.
an approach of a top level support like the Japanese do, with defining a status of living cultural heritage or whatever. I don't forget what they call it.
Yeah.
And and on the other end, also a low level support, which would be, for example, that something like closing that instrument making school in New York mustn't happen.
Hmm.
Is needs to be held up at any cost, and there were also here in Germany there were some, in my opinion, very wrong political decisions which led to a decline in students, and there are many ways where I think politics or governments should protect these cultural fields, because if
Mm.
not, we go back to feudal times. There will be
Hmm.
rich people who will sponsor, if they like, uh, certain artists or not. Yeah? And that is just as it
Mm.
uh, was in the Middle Ages, or for most of the history.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a very sad development if we go back to feudal times in culture.
Mm.
But the danger is it's happening. And
Hmm. Yeah. Sebastian, thank you very much. I hope good stuff happens soon.
yeah,
There are some great people still in this world that hopefully listen to us, listen to you, and other people who have things to add to culture and to humanity.
yeah.
And before we leave our audience, would you like to have a final word?
Well, I had many final words already, hadn't I? Well,
Yeah.
let me go back to the quote from Beethoven,
Mm.
that from the heart it should go back to the heart. That's what I hope for,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that would be a
Yes.
very good conclusion.
Yes. Sebastian, thank you very much actually for your great time, accepting the invite and having all this great discussion and
Yeah,
sharing.
thank you, Father.
And mm, and thanks to Anadi viewers.
Thank you too.
And we'll see you soon again.
I hope so. I'd be happy. Thank you very much.